Hi students, welcome to lesson 37, Development, Displacement and Social Crisis, Part B. Huge human and environmental cost has to be paid for various developmental projects, including massive displacement. It is high time to realize the need of transforming our developmental policies to answer the larger human and environmental requirements until it becomes too late. After completion of this lesson, you will be able to understand how development-induced displacement leads to social crisis. Development-induced displacement is a social issue which affects and disrupts life of not only tribal and villagers but also of those living in urban areas. People have begun scrutinizing the authenticity of development-induced displacement, an offshoot of the model of development. The non-government organizations and civil society organizations not only focus on the insufficiencies of resettlement and rehabilitation programs, they also question the very premise of such activities executed by government in the name of public interest. Project affected people are group of persons who are forced to leave their lands or their possessions as a result of development process. It includes the landless, seasonal farmers, the fishermen, those engaged in work of art, culture and handicrafts, etc. There are three categories of affected people. Firstly, the displaced persons are those who are forced to flee or move out of their land when the development projects require acquisition of their homesteads. The project affected persons are those who sacrifice their livelihood fully or partially without being displaced. In some cases, their individual land is acquired, and in others, the common property resources like forests and fishing ground affects their livelihoods. The indirectly displaced persons. The disposal of waste from projects such as cement plant and pollution from industries affects land fertility, health, etc. of those who are living in the close vicinity of project area. This often deprives the dependents on such lands of their livelihoods and forces them to move out. These people are called indirectly displaced persons. Such outcomes lead to the necessity of enactments of laws that address the issue of fair and just compensation as well as of resettlement and restoration. Fair compensation, Transparency in Land Acquisition and Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013 is a ray of hope as it proposes that comprehensive outcome of compulsory acquisition should be such that affected persons become partners in the development. Literature on development-induced displacement studies reports that building of dams in India is one of the major causes of uprooting people from their establishments. In post-independent India, approximately 3,000 big dams have been constructed. These huge constructions have led to forced eviction of millions of people. Most vulnerable amongst all are tribals. One of the most significant case studies related to dam building in India is over Sardar Sarovar Dam, India's most controversial dam project. Narmada Bachao Andolan was the first systematic movement against the forced displacement, and it was spearheaded by Medha Patkar along with other social activists and media. The Tehri project on Ganges in Uttaranchal was built to expand irrigation and power generation. It was established in 1979 and displaced 85,600 persons. Resettlement plan was not an integral part for the displacement pre-1980. Studies shows that resettlement in the form of house site was neither liability nor responsibility of the project authorities. Nagarjun Sagar, Hirakud, Tungabhadra and Mayur Kashi dams, the Roorkela, Bhilai and Bokaro steel plants displaced many people, but there was no strong policy to restore their lives. Mining induced displacement and resettlement threatens social sustainability. Because of the availability of rich mineral resources in India, numerous incidences of development induced displacement was witnessed. Such involuntary shifts are found in areas with relatively high density of politically powerless populations. Most vulnerable groups are tribal and other indigenous people. Coal mines are responsible for large scale development in mining sector. Coal mines have substantially increased in the period of 1980s. The main reason is shift from underground to open cast mines for exploiting lower quality coal that resulted in acquisition of over some 1500 acres of land. In case of undercast mines, number of displaced are lower than open cast. The disadvantage of such displacement is that it absorbs fewer people in the jobs created by the project. In fact, Cernia has put forth the difficulties of policy makers regarding development which is applicable to independent nations like India. Development is for whom and whose cost? It is very difficult to answer such questions. Cernia says people are and should be the starting point, the center and the end goal of each development intervention. According to Peter Pence, Director of Center for Refugee Studies, York University, Toronto, three broad ethical perspectives that can be used to justify development-induced displacement. They are public interest, self-determination and egalitarianism. The public interest perspective embodied in cost-benefit analysis supports the decision that brings the greatest net benefits of population as a whole. The self-determination perspective privileges freedom and personal control. In its form, forced displacement, at least of those who legally own property, is unjust because it violates property rights. The egalitarian perspective privileges actions that reduce poverty or inequality. As Pence points out, is an ethically complex issue in which public interest and distributive concerns stand in tension with self-determination and individual rights. Though coercive displacement should be avoided in favor of negotiated settlement, it is significant to provide full compensation to the displaced and use the development benefits to reduce poverty and inequality. Ill consequences of the displacement lead to the requirement of policies and legislations that address the issues of not only developed induced displacement but also about rehabilitation and resettlement. Shilpi Jain and Yogesh Diksenian, and in an article entitled Development Induced Displacement, have given these suggestions and recommendations to deal with the problem of displacement caused by development. Firstly, states should ensure that eviction impact assessments are carried out prior to the initiation of project which could result in development based displacement, with a view to fully securing the human rights of all potentially affected persons, groups and communities. Secondly, states should fully explore all possible alternatives to any act involving forced eviction. Thirdly, sufficient information shall be provided to affected persons, groups and communities concerning all state projects. Fourthly, the state must provide or ensure fair and just compensation for any losses of personal, real or other property or goods, including rights or interests in property. Fifthly, resettlement must occur in a just and equitable manner and in full accordance with international human rights law. Sixthly, states should ensure that adequate and effective legal or other appropriate remedies are available to any persons claiming that his or her right of protection against forced evictions has been violated or is under threat of violation. Seventhly, the very basis of the land acquisition policies in its legal premises is required to be compatible with constitutional frame of fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy and special provisions for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and weaker sections. The effects of displacement spill over to generations in many ways, such as loss of traditional means of employment, change of environment, disrupted community life and relationships, marginalization, a profound psychological trauma and more. Let us now talk about resettlement and rehabilitation, which is also popularly known as R&R. Displacement needs to be redefined in view of emerging concerns about resettlement and rehabilitation. R&R should focus on change in norms of compensation and calculation of non-monetary items. It is equally important to recognize the customary rights and use of common property and natural resources. Compensation to the displaced people should consider reconstruction of livelihood that has to be the main objective along with ultimate goal of rehabilitation. The government, in order to have a national policy on resettlement and rehabilitation, which after much of debate and discussion has been enacted as the right to fair compensation, transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement act 2013. Resettlement is achieved once displaced people are relocated physically, while rehabilitation is re-establishment of displaced and project affected people in totality. Rehabilitation aims to restore and improve the lost livelihood, and emphasis is laid to start a new life with dignity through recreation of physical, social and cultural environment. Orientation of resettlement is economic restoration, whereas rehabilitation aims at rebuilding community system disintegrated as a result of displacement. Rehabilitation program must include stress reduction techniques for affected and counseling the displaced to adjust with the host community as it's their new home. When there is involuntary displacement and when affected households have to move from their place of origin to place of relocation, conflicting situations arise because of disputes within the family with government officials and host community. The conflict within the family are mainly about sharing of the compensation amount, purchase of land, alternative occupations, construction of new house, problems of women, education of children, problems of widow and old aged. Conflict outside are related to dealing with official machinery, property dealers, court cases and adaptation with people at a new site. These objectives of rehabilitation should be kept in mind before the people are given an alternative site for living. Displaced community should be resettled in such a manner that they are able to live along the lives of their own patterns. Efforts must be done to protect and restore their livelihood sources. Displaced people of one community must be resettled in same area so that they don't feel isolated altogether. The people displaced should get an appropriate share in the fruits of the development. Preference of recruitment in the development project should be given to the project affected people. Resettlement should be done in the nearest locality to the maximum possible extent. If the resettlement is not possible in the neighboring area, efforts must be done to develop all the facilities which were available to them, such as drinking water, electricity, schools, hospital and other basic amenities. Michael Cernia suggests a risk and reconstruction model of rehabilitation that would be marked by a series of transitions from landlessness to land-based resettlement, joblessness to re-employment, food insecurity to safe nutrition, homelessness to house reconstruction, increased morbidity and mortality to improved health and well-being, and social disarticulation and deprivation of common property resources to community reconstruction and social inclusion. The right to fair compensation and transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013 considers farmers and livelihood losers who are dependent on land being acquired. Simultaneously, it promotes and facilitates land acquisition for industrialization, infrastructure and urbanization projects in timely and transparent manner. A large number of people use the compensation amount to construct new property on newly allotted land. Some part of compensation was used in fulfilling social obligations like marriages in their families, while others used the money to buy new assets. Compensation amount is also used for higher studies of children, and some use the amount by depositing the money in bank as savings. Some business oriented people have also utilized the compensation amount to add on to their stocks. As per the legislation, a comprehensive rehabilitation and resettlement package is provided for those who lost their livelihood support, which includes the landless and tenants. The Act also provides for schools and playgrounds, health centers, roads and electric connections, and assured sources of safe drinking water for each family. The role of the Gram Sabha has been clearly stressed, and the government has to consult them. The government has to also comply with the other laws like Panchayat or PISA Act, popularly known as Panchayat Extension of the Selected Areas Act 1996, the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006, and the Land Transfer Regulations in Scheduled 5 tribal areas. Development-induced displacement is caused due to decision of government to acquire land for the development or decision of state to change the use of land owned or changes in the use of land owned by the state machinery, or by introduction of some new restrictions on current use of land. People have begun scrutinizing the authenticity of development-induced displacement, an offshoot of the model of development. Displacement needs to be redefined in view of emerging concerns about resettlement and rehabilitation. Compensating to displaced people should consider reconstruction of livelihood that has to be the main objective along with the ultimate goal of rehabilitation. Because of lack of common policy, there was much pressure to have an act which provides for fair and transparent resettlement and compensation system and right to fair compensation transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. Lack of strong national policy and weaknesses in the existing policy documents are the major problems.